My name is Gretchen Bulova, and I am the director of the Office of Historic Alexandria. Thank you for joining us for the final presentation of the comprehensive plan for the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House by our project consultants, Glave Homes Architecture and Healy Kohler Design. The City of Alexandria acquired the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House and Garden in 2017 with financial support from the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, the Virginia Land Conservation Fund, the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, and then homeowner Joe Reeder. I want to acknowledge Joe Reeder for his stewardship and vision to preserve this historic house and garden. As part of the sale agreement, Joe Reeder retained life tenancy, and at the age of 98 today, he continues to live and enjoy the home and age in place. Visitors can enjoy the site's pocket garden, which is open to the public daily from 10 to 6, and both the house and garden have easements on them. In 2021, we undertook extensive exterior work to preserve the building after discovering a major roof leak. This work included a new shingle roof, as well as a standing seam roof, chimney repointing, and siding, window, and woodwork renewal. The restoration contractor was Hank Handler of Oak Grove Construction, who's joining us today, with support from Al Cox, retired preservation architect for the City of Alexandria. Thank you both for being in the audience. Their preservation work was amazing, as you all know, and contributed greatly to our understanding of the house's original construction. In 2024, we finalized the site's historic structures report, which was done by Glave Homes Architecture, which documented the structure and finishes and provided a deeper dive into the site's construction chronology and history. This important report was generously funded by the Historic Alexandria Foundation. The next step for us was to create a comprehensive plan for the site, to serve as a document to guide the eventual transition from a private residence to the city's 9th museum. So from interpretation to visitor flow to tour accessibility and options and more, here today to lead the presentation of this plan is Stephen Blashfield, principal for Glave Homes. Help me welcome Stephen Blashfield.
Thank you, Gretchen. And thank you all for being here this evening. It's been a great honor for us to be involved with the City of Alexandria, to be involved with this property through now the second project, and to have the opportunity to work with my colleagues at Healy Kohler, Diamond, and Terry, who are going to be sharing a little bit later as parts of this presentation go forward. So what I would like to do today is share with you a little bit about the summary of what we did, what this project is about, a little bit about the process that we went through to come up with the comprehensive plan, and then I'm going to share some key tidbits about the plan itself. So we're going to talk about the architecture and the site features. My friends at Healy Kohler are going to talk about the interpretation of some of the features that we've talked about doing with the interior of the space. And then we're going to share a few recommendations that we've made to the city throughout this process. There will be some time at the end for questions. So we'll look forward to trying to answer those as we go forward. Many of you have seen this house, and it's a lovely property, very unique in its character. As Gretchen mentioned, we were commissioned to do a comprehensive plan to look at how do we change this house from what is a residence to one that becomes a place of public visitation, that it's its future evolution. You know, the Murray-Dick-Fawcett House is a remarkably preserved home that's continued to be used as a residence for more than 2.5 centuries. And, it's eclectic, it's vernacular. As you see from this diagram that we developed out of the Historic Structures Report, it's a house that evolved over time. It's a series of additions that occurred. Um, it wasn't just all built as one thing, but it went through iterations of different family groups, different families that lived here over time, uh, and different family types. And so there are a remarkable number of stories, whether talking about the people that worked here, the commerce that went on in this place, there were people enslaved in this property. All of these stories are crucially important and really add to the opportunity for the city of Alexandria to tell of the history of this city. And that's why they've acquired this home to have that opportunity. So the long-range goal is to convert the site into a place for public visitation and to allow these stories to be told. It's a story that goes beyond what many house museums are as the wealthiest household in the city, to tell the story of ordinary people here in Alexandria over time and the different ways that they lived through that history. We started out by really looking at basic operational patterns. So how do you create this place of public visitation, and what kinds of events and activities are going to go on here? And so we've talked about, the daily site access to the garden, which already exists. So you can just today go down every afternoon and the garden is open to you as members of the public. But in the future, we want to see weekend and monthly tours, where there's opportunities for people to come in and experience both guided and self-guided and have an experience with the house. Semi-annual special programs. If any of you experienced some of the things that Al did when the house was being restored in 2021, very popular programs, but fascinating opportunity to learn about architecture and its evolution. And then it's a great property, and there's definitely an opportunity here for events and functions, particularly in the garden space, that can be used for small scale events that occur. And so we talked about all of those things. We're not talking about, a huge museum. A modest number of people we expect to come to this on a regular basis. So it might be 5 to 10 people in a day that come to the museum in sort of the typical patterns. When it's actually open on the weekends, it might be 25 to 50 people who come through over the course of a day. But it also gives you the opportunity to events that might be 40 or 50 people. Specialty house tours on occasion where there's, maybe as many as 100 that come through in the property. And so we needed to think about what all that meant for the house and what does it mean to have those numbers of people coming in and out and experiencing the place and experiencing it in several different ways. So whether it's those sort of open opportunities for garden access when there's, the house is not occupied or staffed, so people can have their own experience. When the house is staffed, there's both self-guided and guided tours that give you different experiences and understandings of the property. And then when there's events, what does that mean? And all those things create different functions that we need to think about over the course of evaluating the property. And so our firm has spent many years working on a number of comprehensive plans and master plans for historic sites and museums just like this and tackling some of these issues. And so we've developed a process that really helps us do that. For this particular house, this built upon a great deal of past work that had already been done. So prior scholarship and research, many of you know this house has been studied for decades. Back to the 1930s when they did historic American building survey drawings, there have been paint analysis and tests and evaluations through many decades that have helped build to the point that we are now. There's the findings from the recent restoration work that Gretchen talked about in 2021, where much of the exterior was restored and a lot was learned in that process. And ultimately, all of that material was brought together in the report in 2024 for the Historic Structures Report that analyzed all this, made a series of recommendations about other repairs that need to be made, improvements, and things that will make the house live for another 200 years. And so that was really the intention behind all that. And the comprehensive plan builds upon all that so that we can really look to what the future of the property is. For us, this was about an 8-month process. So we had an intensive working relationship with the city. They developed a committee. We went through 2 intensive planning workshops where we talked, for half a day in each of those about how could we use this? What are the themes that we want to talk about in interpretation? What are the experiences that we want people to have? And what are the experiences that people are expecting when they come to the Murray-Dick-Fawcett house? We had 2 public feedback sessions. I see some familiar faces here today that I think joined us with some of those public feedback sessions to share with you some of those ideas and understand a little bit about your thinking about this property and what makes it important. And we took all that and really dove into a process of conceptual planning where we did iterations and talked about different approaches and types of interventions that we could take into the property to really make it effective. Ultimately, we brought that together in the comprehensive plan with a cost estimate. We've talked about phasing, and we've looked at how do you implement this over time to develop. So we developed a full project cost in today's dollars, knowing that it might be a few years before these things are actually implemented so that this can be revisited when the time is right for this to actually become the museum that it's envisioned to be. And then we've developed that into the final plan this past fall. And so today we're here to share with you the elements of that comprehensive plan. So I want to share with you just a few of the ideas that have come out of this, the things that we've implemented in this process. I'm going to start by talking about the exterior. And there's a series of spaces in this property. Outside gardens, places that you've both experienced and not experienced fully. And so what we actually did was we developed 10 different components that we looked at to divide up the house and really analyze the individual components of how people would experience those different spaces, understand the components of that history, and what those different elements meant. All of this built upon the historic structures report, where part of our recommendations with the comprehensive plan are to implement the repairs, the restoration that were identified in the historic structures report so that this house could be preserved for the long term. The first area that we talked specifically about was the West Garden, the area that many of you know and have experienced already with the house. And understanding that in the future, the primary entrance to this property will actually be off St. Asaph Street, not at the front door, but coming through the garden. And that is where the public most likely will enter, in their experiences. And so in order to do that, we need to make the space accessible. We need to renovate the paving. We propose that we'll need a ramp. That will get you up to the upper level terrace, that you will have accessible entry into the house so that everybody has the opportunity to experience something about the Murray-Dick-Fawcett house as part of that experience. That's also the area where events will occur. So we want to, recreate that paving area so there's a tentable space. The recommendations also included lowering the brick wall that's around that portion of the garden so there's more visibility into the property, and allow people to experience the garden from the street, and understand that it's more of a welcoming place. That wall is not historic. It's not something that, needs to be preserved exactly as it is. But in the future, when everybody's coming in from the side on St. Asaph Street, the second sort of component of that is that we need to develop a space that has visitor services. And the garage is the perfect place for that. because it's a very intact structure, but again, not historic. So we can make changes to this without defying the history, bring in things like handicap restrooms, a small catering kitchen space, a staff space for ticketing and reception, so that when the staff is there on the weekends, they have a place to greet people, to guide them, to let them know how to experience the house. That's going to mean some new doors and things of that nature, to service the house, service the garage as it changes function. But that's also its placement there on the St. Asaph Street side means that most people will come in that gate and they will be greeted right there by somebody when the house is staffed. The second area looking at the site was looking at the rear site out, the rear alley and the back wall. Many of you know that one of the most unique features of the Murray-Dick-Fawcett house is the privies that are around the back of this property, that are something that I don't know that very many people have seen in a house of its current era, right? But one of the challenges is on the back wall of this property that there's a site wall that's built almost right up against the face of the back property. And so your access to those, clear access for people to come and experience those elements of the house is restricted. It also restricts your access to get around to the other side of the house into the east garden. And so the comprehensive plan proposed moving the wall, and that we've recommended that the city explore the idea of changing that back wall so that you have access around the back of the house, that you go through the process of talking about what that alley access is and how that is affected by that, but that allows you to have full handicap access all the way around the outside of the property. We also propose that there's a gate there, so there's some security, so that when the property is not staffed, that we're still not letting people back into the back areas of the property where they can't be seen. But we do want to make sure that there's an opportunity for that east garden to be interpreted. And so with that last part, there are a lot of things that happen in the east garden we know historically that have an opportunity to be interpreted. The newer kitchen that was built in 20 years ago was built specifically with the idea that it could be removed. The historic structures report recommended removal because of the impact that it's having on the historic house. And the comprehensive plan follows that recommendation, that that new kitchen would be removed and the east garden could be reinterpreted as a working space, a space that the people who lived in the house in its many iterations could experience and utilize. So that's a little bit about the exterior. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry and Diamond, who are going to talk a little bit more about the interpretation in the interior.
Thank you, Stephen. And the other group of people that I'd like to thank before we get started with the interpretive plan for the house is first Gretchen, who has been very formative with us, steering us in the right directions all the time, making sure that we didn't get off path and so forth. And most importantly, her staff. We all came together a couple times and went through brainstorming sessions and charrettes to come up with the interpretive trail and experiences within the space. And many of you might have seen this way back when in May when we actually presented a little bit of the storyline, but it really is this project for us. The visitor experience for us is about the house and the architecture, that history that the house represents, and how that house forms a glue not only with the families and its residents, but with the city and the people that actually either lived or worked within the house. And so with that, we had three major themes that actually evolved around the house. One being Alexandria. As the house grew, the city grew. As the city grew, there were changes both to its culture and its history, and we want to record that within this interpretive plan. The changing household of the people that represent the household of different eras, and how those people actually worked and used the house with that. So with this, we had sub themes and so forth with each of the three. We got into the businesses, got into major cultural shifts within the city, and then got into, again, the people that aligned with that. So, so this is the outside and the exterior interpretation, and this is the overview. Diamond's going to come up here, so I don't ramble too long and get into the details and so forth. But within the main garden, moving up to the upper garden, we have the stages of the building. All of this is to give the visitors a little bit of a highlight before they could or enter the interior exhibits. When you move into the upper garden, we have intros for the exhibits and the themes that the house represents. People who live here, again, a small synopsis for day and daily visitors coming in, and then we move through into the back garden or the east garden, and that is actually where we have a little bit more interpretive messages with that. All of this is actually to formulate, as Stephen kind of outlined previously, this whole idea that this is a place that you can have a tour on a great weathered friendly weekend, something that we haven't had lately. But you can also have special events, and also it is set up that it can be self-guided for not only events, but for days that may have a larger group of visitors coming to that.
Hi, everyone. So what we've sort of split the exterior plans into is sort of, this is the accessible all the time side, and then the back east garden would be only accessible when the Museum of the Interior is open. So the idea here is that you'd come in on the main, at the main site entrance, which is here. You can go be greeted at visitor services and sort of get your bearings. And then what we've looked at and proposed here is that if this is all you're seeing and you're not going in the house, you do want a bit of a comprehensive story where you don't feel like you're missing something if you're visiting. So what we've proposed here is that there are graphic rails with tactile models of the house in each stage as it was built, so you can see how it changed over time and see it with the house behind it, so you can get that visual of the change. And then we also want to highlight some of the families, enslaved people, tenants, the people that lived and worked in the house as well. So then you can either choose to go in the house and you have that intro to the story, or if the museum is open and the back garden is accessible, there's more information here about architectural details that are interesting to the house, as well as interpretation for the smoke house that's around here that we'll get into a little bit later. So then we move into the interior.
So the interior exhibit, again, was set up to be both self-guided and aligned with the tour guide. Most importantly, with the overall plan that I just messed up a little bit, is that there are two entrances. One is to the left, the exhibit intro, and that is not as accessible. There's a step up there. But what we did was in the lobby area in the center, I can't use my cursor here. When you enter the lobby in the center, who was here and why, that is the accessible entrance. This is the entrance that we would have the main intro theater introducing the house, the site, and the people, and also an interactive for accessibility. But most importantly, if we move back to the left into the intro of the exhibit with the workroom, even though it's not accessible, this is the preferred path. We have, you move into the intro, then the domestic sphere, which is the kitchen. You then move down through the hall or the corridor and you enter the chamber. So the northwest chamber is the growth of the city. It's tied to Alexandria. Business operations in the hall, that is tied to the people and the businesses associated with the house, and again, evolving back to Alexandria. The southeast chamber is much more the people running the household, the people that both live there and work there. And then in northeast chamber is the whole story of the preservation, and that is the closing story. With that, we have access to the portico, but what we want to do is have the entrance and the exit be the same, so you can move back through the house. We think that with the numbers, we were not going to get too much of a jam or a back jam with people going both ways within the house.
So then in this first section of the house, you have your introduction where you're introduced to the space, and then you would walk through the kitchen. In the kitchen, we're thinking that there would be sort of scenic recreations of pots, a hearth, what would the actual cooking that could happen in this space, as well as historic style furnishings where visitors can sit and sort of experience. We're thinking there's a artifact case and interpretation here of small items that might represent things that you might find in this room. And the question that we think is sort of interesting about this space is that how would different cultures and classes have used a space like this to cook, to warm a home, those types of, that type of information. And then the other questions that would be answered here are like, why was the kitchen placed here particularly? How does it compare to today's kitchen? So these are the questions that we want to ask the visitor so that ideally as they experience the space, they can learn and answer those questions. And then as Terry mentioned in the who was here and why, this is our accessible area where you can access it from the outside as well. Because the challenge of this house is that it's really not handicap accessible with the stairs and the thin hallways. So here, ideally, someone can still access the house in a wheelchair and experience the story with our interactive monitors that we have here. And the idea is that those would be sort of map-based where they can touch and experience what the house looks like while not actually going in. So then on the large chunk of the house, we'll start with growth of the city. And what we're proposing here is that this would have an audio visual program where you can sit and every wall would have graphics that could be lit and just lit, or there's a story going in audio that's talking about how Alexandria could have changed over time, and the images reinforce that of, okay, in 1700, this is what it looked like. In 1800, this is what it could have looked like, to sort of have that connection of what the house experienced in Alexandria over time. And then as we go into business operations, this is an area that would be sort of more traditionally interpreted with cases with items, lots of interpretive graphics here to just talk about. This was a place of commerce. There was a lot of businesses that happened in and around the house and in and around the area. So just to talk about how those changed over time with the connection to the wharf, that's, not too far from there. And then in running the household, this is where we sort of talk about that domestic sphere of what did it take to run a household like this? What types of people ran a household like this? And so this is where you'd sort of get into there were tenants that lived here. There were renters. There were multiple families that experienced in the house that may not have lived there, but they were involved in the comings and goings and the activities. So we're calling this a middle-class house. What does that mean in 18th century Virginia? And then the portico is the traditional main entrance to the house. So there's some interpretation about that, but talking about the open windows and the sort of blinds that are there that are particular to the house. And then as we go to the preservation room, this is a connection to the city of Alexandria, why this house was preserved, other sites in the area that are preserved similarly that have a similar timetable in history. And then we want some activities in here for the visitor to sort of explore more what the city of Alexandria has to offer. And then that would be sort of your experience of the house and the interpretation inside. So I'll give it over to Stephen. Thank you.
So the thing that you see through this process is that we're not proposing a traditional house museum. We're not proposing a house that's identified to a specific year or furnished, for a certain owner, or, it's understanding that this house evolved over time, that there's a lot of different stories here, and there's a lot of different opportunities to tell those stories. And so as we got through this process, we also had some key recommendations I wanted to share with you that, are important fundamentally to this process. The first one is everything we do, we want to be about protecting the historic fabric. This is a remarkably intact house over its history. It has features, the gas lamps you see here, that are still in existence in the house. It has so many of these little tidbits of things that we want to make sure stay. And, that's what makes, for those of you who've been in the house, that's what makes the experience so unique, that you see these things that in most houses in Alexandria, they've been renovated out over their history. And so everything is about trying to preserve the historic fabric as part of this process. But we also want to make sure that we offer multiple methods of interpretation. And so understanding that people are going to experience this in different ways. People learn in different ways. One of the things that we've learned about working with museums is that not everybody has the same way of interpreting, learning, experiencing this. And so we want to make sure that we provide those different kinds of opportunities, the self-directed experience where somebody can learn at their own pace, but also set up so that the staff in the here in Alexandria can take people through and tell them some of the interesting components, have theme-based tours, actually take people into the basement or in the attic where there's these features that you just can't see other than getting down on your knees and crawling through a hole in the attic. And, definitely unique experiences that you can do in this house, but aren't going to be for everybody. As part of that. But we want to make sure that all of those different interpretive opportunities are available in this house for those different kinds of experiences. But the key to all this is that we want to make sure that we accept that there are some limitations to this house. As Diamond mentioned, the hallways are narrow. We can't get everything to be accessible. And if we tried to make it all accessible, we need to take out so much stuff that it really wouldn't retain the same character. And so we want to address accessibility through opportunities with different parts of the house, get people into different parts of the house, but then also have video interpretation to help people, that can be both on the web and, as part of the experience in individual spaces, so that the experience can be had by everybody equally, but it also wants to preserve important components of the house. It also means that we have to be sensitive about how many people can come in the house. We're not going to have 50-person tours at one time because the house can't handle that. And so the experiences need to be scaled to what the property can handle. And that's really important to understanding how the future of this space as a museum is going to be. Another recommendation, which many of you were here for our stakeholder feedback discussion, was we proposed that the city explore changing the name of the property, that it reflect a new idea about this house. Certainly the Murray family, the Dick family, the Fawcett family are all families that existed here, but there are other families that aren't mentioned when you use those three names. There are other elements of this house that aren't mentioned as part of that interpretation. And so we think it's time to rethink that and go through a process to actually, explore what the new identity of this house would be. We're not making a proposal about what that is today, but just that process actually be undertaken to rethink what that identity is. And the last thing is that we want to allow for ongoing interpretation and scholarship. As I mentioned at the beginning, this house has already been through decades of study, and every one of these iterations of effort, we've learned something new. You know, there's been new things discovered. There are still many questions in this house, and we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for that continued investigation, that can change of interpretation over time as we learn more, and people understand even more about who lived here and what their experiences were and what some of these elements were in this property. And so that's an important component of all that. So that summarizes the key recommendations in the comprehensive plan. I'm going to turn it back over to Gretchen to lead us into the question part of our discussion.
All right, thank you for a great presentation. Let's give them a round of applause. So we're going to call everybody back up onto the stage and we'll take some questions. Come on back up. Roberta, go ahead.
Any examples or an illustration that shows what the graphic rails would look like? Did you hear that? Example, an illustration that shows what graphic rails look like.
Some different examples in the process of, you know, what those might look like. I think Diamond mentioned the idea of having models, you know, that are outside elements that, you know,
People can touch and experience, and there's something very tactile and touchable.
Closer to the light. I don't know if other people are having the same thought that I was, but for those of us who have gone to places and looking at different houses, I realized that every place has been a snapshot of one time. And I don't think I can think of one that I've gone that it's went across this time spectrum. So I'm really curious about how you're deciding about showing furnishings. Are you going to do some from some era, some from another? And also, what thought processes did you go through to decide about visitor seating and how much and why you felt that was necessary? I'm really in this part about it.
It's definitely something that when we spoke to Gretchen and the team about it, it was important that there is seating for visitors that just want to sit and sort of watch and experience. But why not make it sort of historically styled so it sort of feels like, oh, I'm sitting on something that might have been here, you know, however long years ago. And we were thinking that each room sort of can have an era or a feel to it.
we do.
So- Sorry. The just to follow up with the question, it was deemed that since this house went through so many eras, it would be beneficial if we dealt with the house thematically. And you mentioned furnishings, and we've all been to house museums and they've been furnished to a certain period and so forth. To offset that, we wanted to have it more as a classical museum experience. Showcase some of the furnishings, but it wouldn't be a furnished area or a furnished room associated with that. And that there are other assets within the city that actually has those furnishings, furnishing experiences, that this would be a separate experience that would fall in line without the constraints of a time period, really highlight the evolution of the house, really showcasing and reinforcing the history of it, and being able to actually speak to the different people of those different eras within the environment.
Do you have any plans for the basement, which is fascinating in itself?
So certainly we plan to, within the historic structures report, there was a number of repairs that were recommended to the basement. One of our actual suggestions that I didn't really touch on was that we want to open up the entrance to the basement from the east garden so that there's better access down into the basement. So that there can be interpretive tours of that space and some of the features that are down there that most people don't see. That's an area where I think there is still a lot to learn about how all of these elements and why all these walls and brick, features are here. And, I think there's been a lot of interpretation of, when all those different constructions had, how these elements got into place. But I think there's still a lot to know about how did they really use this space over time.
I think there's a cistern there.
Yeah, there's a cistern and it is. It really is fascinating space.
Well, before there was a comment that came in on Zoom connected to the last question, just a reminder that the Leafendle House and Gardens in Alexandria interprets a timeline from 1785 to 1969. So it's not a snapshot in time either, and it seems to be working well.
The privies didn't seem to be part of the basic tour. Is there some thought about how the public can experience the privies?
Yeah, so they are actually intended to be part of the tour so that they will be opened up when the house is open so that people can move around the outside and actually see them. One of the things that we really want to do is not change them a whole lot because of their such unique character and, for what they are, so that, once we're able to move that wall and create access around the back, then people can fully experience all three privies. They can be interpreted for what they are, because they were spaces for, depending on who you were in the household, you had a different, space. And so that, is definitely part of the interpretation that's intended.
Maybe I missed it, but has there been any reference to furnishing this house besides signs? Because I don't think that's going to do it. People want to look at an old house and they want to see how people live there. Signs will not do that. You have to have furnishings.
The intention is that there will be, and there will also be certain areas like the kitchen that would be sort of furnished as it would be used as well. So there's going to be a mix.
But from those diagrams you showed, you seem to have signs in every room of the house and every wall. To me, that is not interpreting a period house.
I think part of the way that we're approaching this, there will be not only just text panels that describe this, but photographs of different periods, within the space. There'll be digital elements where you can look at different experiences and actually see different potential configurations of how the house, might have looked during different periods. And so that's one of the great things that we have at our hands now with the technology of exhibit design, is that you can actually do multiple interpretations of a space without just being fixed in one, element, that you would in the typical period furnished house, where we pick a year and say, this room is going to be what it looked like in 1822 or something like that. So we're specifically trying to avoid that.
I have one quick follow-up. Gretchen, do you have enough furnishings in your fantastic storeroom that there ever could be a rotating type of thing? Of course, I know that's very labor intensive, but
No,
I think that would be
we
really
have
intriguing.
We have an extensive collection here in Historic Alexandria. We also have a lot of objects related to the families that have lived here. When the Cheesemans sold the property, they donated a generous amount of things to our collection. We are not looking at a furnished period house museum. That is not what we're doing here. So we will have objects that are, illustrate a certain topic, like this was a chamber, so we'll have elements of that. We also really foresee using reproduction so that people can sit down, in an 18th century, a 1865 chair, things like that. So these rooms are small. We have groups coming in. We want to be able to tell the story and have people move about the spaces. So it's about the flow through the spaces. So, but we do not intend for this to be a furnished period house museum.
I just think it might be great to have a case of maybe certain things where they were from one family and then maybe another time have a different family, things like that.
There's limitless, like we have period costumes from different eras of the house. There's all kinds of amazing things we can do with these spaces. And also we can augment it with exhibitions, here at the Lyceum. Like when we first open it, we can also do something here. There are a lot of very good examples of museums that do a fantastic job of telling the history without being furnished. For example, Lincoln's Cottage, Drayton Hall. And when you're looking at this site, what to you is the most important thing? It's the least altered site in this region. It has the historic fabric. We want people to look at the architecture and change of architectural styles and technology over time. That's the value of this house. It's got some really cool things that if we clutter it up with furniture, you'll never see, right? So that's the basic focus. And with this comprehensive plan, this is an outline, a potential, a roadmap for us to follow. When we raise the funds to restore the interior, and then the next project will be, okay, now it's time to bring on an exhibit designer to actually work on the panels and the text and the objects. We're looking what, 8, 10 years down the line till we get to the point. This is the potential of what we can see in this house and how this can be an additional asset to us here in historic Alexandria. Now, keep in mind, most of our properties are public buildings. We got a firehouse, a fort, a tavern, an apothecary. We're telling the story of the public, the everyday person in Alexandria. Well, this is our chance to talk about the everyday person and how they lived and how they lived over time. So this is such an exciting opportunity for us. I think they've done a great job of kind of laying out, here's the themes and these are things you can do. Will we have this much technology? I don't know. Will we be able to afford that much technology? Well, I don't know, right? So anyway, we definitely, I appreciate, these are great questions. Thank you so much. And I look forward to kind of continuing this story about what do you want to see in this museum? What has impact? What's going to make a visitor come to Alexandria for a day? And mind you, if they're going to shop, they're going to eat, they're going to spend the night, and they're going to see how many museums? 2, 3 max? What's going to make them come to this house over the apothecary? Of course, they're going to the apothecary, right? Over archaeology, over Carlisle House. There's a lot of competition just in our own community for the museum experience. So how can this be different, but convey that compelling story that we want to? So that's kind of where we are with this project.
I'm getting clear to my question. But I still don't have it. Maybe you can read my mind. I'm trying to imagine whether it's the name, and sorry, but I do agree that 3 name is too much for anyone to remember. Excuse me. I've given you my view on that. But if you had to step back, and as Gretchen was just discussing, think about what differentiates this property from all the others. Is it working families? What's the overarching theme, even though we see it in different ways in different periods?
I would say it's the working family that lived there. It's very sort of middle of the road, not super wealthy, not super poor, just very much middle of the road family that lived there, different types of families that lived there over time. So to me, that's sort of the overarching theme, is that these were working people and they had a little bit, they had that sort of thing. So
It's the diversity of the people that took part within the walls of the building. And again, through the evolution, through the different aspects of the building character, there were different people within there. So again, that's why we took much more of a broad thematic approach, because it provides a leniency to bring out those specific stories without really tying it to a date. And I do want to really kind of confirm that each room within that house has display cases that we can utilize furnishings. Another word is collections and artifacts that are much more thematic and much more direct to the stories that we want to communicate to the visitors coming in.
I have two questions from Zoom. The first one, when you say that you'll be connecting the growth of Alexandria to the house, will there be ways to send people to other sites in Alexandria, like the ships and the museum at the waterfront, Market Square, the canal?
That is a yes. And from the very first day, that was one of the objectives and goals of the entire group, was how we can tie and connect the different assets within the city.
And the second question, Gretchen, you might have touched on it a little, but what is the estimated timeline for opening to the public?
So the estimated timeline. So we've finished these two core projects, right? And we're going to start fundraising for the interior restoration. Joe Reeder has a lease with this house as the life tenant. And so the ball is really in his court, right? He is the tenant. That is his right as the, he gave the equity of his house. So we've obviously started working on the transition concepts. So, fundraising is a big piece. You all know that. The interior restoration alone, based on what we're working on with some of our other sites to restore it, the roof, the exterior took about 2 years, right? Availability of goods is a big part of a restoration. So if you look at fundraising, interior restoration, and then I could see us bringing on some elements early on, like redoing the garage piece first and making the garden interpretation accessible, but then looking ahead several years down the line, so if we have to make up a number, I'm just going to make it up. So in 10 years, we'll be giving active tours of this house. So somewhere we're in there, but we have a price today for the interior restoration, the interior interpretation. That price today versus 5 years from now will be entirely different, right? It's just a moving target. And we are competing with all the other assets that we steward here in Alexandria. That's the best I can do.
Quick question. Since he is the major donor of this property, have you talked with Joe? And just see what his visions are. And you don't have to, as a courtesy, I think.
Sure. He's been part of our team right from the beginning with oral histories, and he's very generous with his thoughts, and also sharing what he did to the house and kind of why he chose to do certain alterations at times. So yeah, absolutely. Martha.
I was thinking about the precious historic fabric and how wonderful it is that you're taking that approach to it. And also the interesting tours that you've had so far over the years, focusing on different aspects of where you are in the process, and then going forward tours about the basement or the whatever. But also, it's just an idea as we spoke here today, but so people can learn about the precious historic fabric and what you do to protect it and barely touch it in a restoration. I think particularly would be fascinating. It could be documented for teaching. It could be, an active tour, or not a tour, but a presentation. I'll end it there. You get what I'm saying. It's just that that could really be a focus for any number of years as we go ahead.
We definitely are of like minds, and that's something since we acquired this site, is to really use it as a teaching tool, a way to foster trades and in keeping the trades alive. As those of you who own, historic homes, it is difficult to find brilliant restoration people, and so using this as a way to kind of keep that talent going. I didn't say that very well, but we're talking about the same thing, as a learning laboratory, right? I think it's very exciting. And, we would have done that with the exterior had it not been such a dire situation. And like any house, until you open it up, you actually have no idea the underlying cause. And so it needed to be done right the first time immediately, but the interior, knock on wood, we'll have more time to really kind of explore that and do, kind of courses and things like that. Because we were giving during Historic Preservation Month, during COVID, sidewalk tours, right? And talking about how were the shingles constructed? How were the windows put together? We did a lot of work on the cat slide roof. It was all very exciting. And we have really good crowds who wanted to learn about this and then take that back to their own historic preservation at their house. So there's so many opportunities with this house. I definitely agree with you.
Gretchen, okay. I couldn't agree with you more about starting with the garage. Start with the obvious work, the least risk, and then back into the more difficult problems. We found at Fawcett House thresholds that the underside was completely eroded by termites, but the top was weathered beautifully. This was going into one of the privies. So we made a plaster cast of the backside of the top and got that mold, then cut a piece of wood to fit that mold, and then laminated, saved the exterior top. But if you start to lose it's okay on the garage. That's nothing, but if you start to lose things like thresholds and things like that in the house, then my experience has become the experience is just less believable, and you go over a tipping point when you lose too much.
Right. Thank you. All right. One final question? This has been amazing. Thank you so much. I enjoy the conversation, the feedback, and I look forward to absolutely continuing our conversation. And thank you to Stephen and Diamond and Terry for the great work they have done, very thoughtful work on our site. Thank you. It's really been a pleasure to work as a team to kind of envision the potential for this house. I'd also like to thank our amazing city team. We have Chow Joy Yu with the Department of Project Implementation, Haroon Hussein with General Services, and with our Historic Alexandria staff, Liz Williams, Eleanor Breen, Al Cox, Susan Cumby, Melanie Gonzalez, Chris Lloyd, Michelle Longo, Ben Skolnick, and Julia Walsh. And I'd also like to thank Sue Kovac-Schumann, who's with us, who was our research historian for many years on the site and dug through thousands of pieces of paper to kind of put together a chronology. I'd also like to thank our community stakeholders who provided ideas and input on this plan, representing local museum professionals, historians, community members, and neighbors. And this concludes our presentation, but please be sure to regularly check in with us on our webpage, our project page on the alexandriava.gov/historic website to stay up to date on our research, our name. That will be a fun challenge. And I don't think we mentioned that we also are going to need to change the address. As we mentioned, we're going to come in on St. Asaph. So there's no point of sending people to 517 Prince because that door is not going to be open. So thank you so much. We will update our website with this recorded presentation that you're welcome to revisit. And then we'll have the slides from the presentation and the actual comprehensive plan itself for you to dive into. So thank you so much. And I can't thank you enough for being here to share this with us.